Hello, I am Leandro Gabriel D. Palma, one of the narrators in this video.
And I am James Daniel A. Palma, also one of the narrators. For today, we are going to be discussing about the different architectural designs throughout history.
We'll dive in headfirst to the classical and neoclassical architecture. What is classical architecture? Well, classical architecture is what we refer to a style of buildings that was originally constructed by the ancient Greeks and Romans, most especially between the 5th century before the Common Era and the 3rd century Common Era. This style was revived many times over the years, and during the Italian Renaissance, architects worked to restore classical Roman architecture. Now, let us head over to the characteristics of classical architecture. Most of us stereotype marble-constructed buildings to be classical and part of the ancient era. Well, we are not wrong. Buildings of classical architecture tend to be constructed using durable building materials such as marble, and these usually are constructed as columns as well. These classical orders can be Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian for Greek architecture, while the Romans also have Tuscan and composite orders. Classical buildings are usually symmetrical and have elements like columns and windows that are evenly spaced out. The windows were usually double hung, and it included a variety of symmetrical window configurations or style. Next up, we'll talk about neoclassical architecture. Neoclassical architecture, also known as neoclassicism, emerged in the mid-18th to early 19th century as a reaction to Rococo architecture, which will be talked about later. This style is a revival of classical architecture and flourished notably in continental Europe, Britain, and United States. Unlike classical revivalism, however, neoclassical architecture tends to draw upon the logic of entire classical volumes rather than just reusing parts. As for the characteristics of neoclassical architecture, it includes the grand scale of the buildings and the simplicity of geometric forms. The Greek, particularly Doric, detailing dramatic columns, and blank walls. By emphasizing the simplicity of the wall, especially its flat, planar quality, as well as the separation of elements, this style was seen as a reaction to the style of our Rococo architecture. The next two types of architecture are the Romanesque and Gothic architecture. First, let's talk about Romanesque. Now, what is Romanesque architecture? Well, it is an architectural style present in Europe from about the mid-11th century to the advent of Gothic architecture. What composed Romanesque architecture were a mix of Roman, Carolingian, and Ottonian, Byzantine, and local Germanic traditions. It was a product of the great expansion of monasticism in the 10th to 11th century. This style of architecture was one of the earliest to use entirely stone materials instead of wood, because stone was the only thing that would support the heavy roofs. The style of building was also inspired by the Byzantine style, hence why it is considered part of the mix, which focused on sweeping religious buildings. Now we move over to the characteristics of a Romanesque architecture. So Romanesque architecture is characterized by the presence of semicircular arches for windows, doors, and arcades. Often, these types of buildings have massive piers and walls and are usually constructed along with galleries above the arcs. The ceiling also usually has barrel or groin walls as seen in the pictures in the slide. This helped keep the strength of the building strong and help prevent collapses. Now let's head over to the Gothic architecture. So Gothic architecture is a pan-European style that lasted between the mid-12th century and the 16th century. The Gothic style was an evolution from Romanesque, which was marked by its many arches, vaulted ceilings, and smaller stained glass windows. The Gothic style took these features and exaggerated them, increasing the scale of arches and the magnitude of the windows. The walls of the buildings, however, became thinner and were supported by flying buttresses to assist the architects in achieving structures that appeared to be closer to the heavens. So with that, we'll talk about its characteristics. Now, what comprises Gothic architecture are its exaggerated arches, as previously stated, taking from the Romanesque architecture and scaled to make it larger, as well as enlarged stained glass windows. The vaulting was more or less redesigned as well to make it look more ribbed and complex, further supporting the ceiling of the building. flying buttresses were added in Gothic architecture, where it is an arc that extends out from a tall stone. The practical purpose of a flying buttress is to help hold the heavy wall up by pushing from the outside, but it also serves an aesthetic purpose. Next up, we have the Baroque and Rococo architecture, and let us first talk about the Baroque architecture. So Baroque architectural style originated in the late 16th century Italy and lasted in some regions such as Germany and colonial South America until the 18th century. Originating from the Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic Church launched an appeal to the faithful through art and architecture. Baroque architecture was created as reaction against the previously mainstream Renaissance architecture. Baroque architecture is also called Catholic style, for it was meant to represent the glory of the Roman Catholic Church. Hence, a good portion of Baroque buildings were churches and cathedrals. Now, as for the characteristics of Baroque architecture, what defines Baroque period is its complex architectural plan, shapes, often oval. It has grandeur, drama, and contrast, especially in the lighting. The buildings are designed to have curvaceousness, dizzying arrays of complex and twisting elements of surface treatments, and the abundance of gilded statues or statuaries. Now, let's move on to Rococo architecture. So, Rococo architecture originated in Paris in the 1730s, where it was first used to decorate entertaining salons. Its demands declined toward the end of the 18th century. Neoclassicism emerged in opposition. Rococo was much more playful and even flamboyant. Rococo is ornamental and full of gilded objects such as chairs, desks, and chests. For the characteristics of Rococo architecture frequently uses decorative elements that incorporate curves and counter-curves, as well as asymmetrical forms based on the shapes of S's and C's. Stucco is also present in Rococo architecture, which are fine exterior or interior plasterwork used as three-dimensional ornamentation. Its interiors feature a light pastel palette featuring such colors as light pinks, yellows, and blues, and known for the use of trompe-l'oeil. Rococo structures are also influenced by the natural world. Decorative elements often emulate the look of shells, pebbles, flowers, birds, vines, and leaves, such as acanthus.
Middle Eastern architecture is one of the world's well-known building traditions. Famous for the radiant colors, rich patterns, and symmetrical silhouettes, this style has been popular in the Muslim world since the 7th century. Middle Eastern architecture is influenced by two different ancient traditions, namely Greco-Roman and Eastern tradition. And here are the features and characteristics of Middle Eastern architecture. Middle Eastern architecture, or also known as Islamic architecture, is distinctive, featuring regional variations of both Islamic and non-Islamic countries. Mosques, houses, and gardens provide the best examples of Islamic architectural principles, displaying distinctive arches, tile designs, towers, and interior gardens. One of the central concepts of Islamic architecture is that of privacy, and for this reason it is referred to as architecture of the veil. Gardens and water have for many centuries played an essential role in Islamic culture, comprising of rectangular, irrigated space with elevated pathways which divide the garden and are often compared to the Garden of Paradise. Courtyards, also known as sans, are found in secular and religious structures. A hypostyle hall is an open hall supported by columns, is considered to be derived from architectural traditions of Achaemenid period Persian assembly halls. Vaulting follows two distinct architectural styles, while Umayyad architecture in the west continues Syrian traditions of the 6th and 7th century. Eastern Islamic architecture was mainly influenced by Sasanian styles and forms. Domes are a cosmic symbol in every religious tradition, featuring vaulted spaces, a circular shape, and stylized repeating decorative patterns. And symbolically, in Islam, the dome represents the vault of heaven in the same way as the garden prefigures paradise. Balconies and screens are a common feature of Islamic domestic architecture due to the warm climates in most countries. And muqarnas are ornaments that are created by the geometric subdivision of a vaulting structure into miniature superimposed pointed arch substructures, also known as honeycomb or stalactite vaults. Islamic architecture makes use of specific ornamental forms including elaborate geometric patterns, floral motifs like the arabesque, and elaborate calligraphic inscriptions which serve to decorate a building. Specify the intention of the building by the selection of the textual program of the inscriptions. And now, let us talk about the architectural designs of Asia. The Asian continent encompasses many countries and a variety of ethnic groups with different cultures and histories, therefore having a lot of unique and diverse architectural designs. Most Asian architecture was influenced by ancient religions, with influences from Hinduism and Buddhism becoming evident. And now, let us talk about the different characteristics and features of Asian architecture. Asian architecture features walled compounds, raised pavilions, wooden columns and paneling, yellow glazed roof tiles, landscape gardens, and a careful application of town planning and use of space are all notable features of architecture in ancient China, with many of them still playing an important part in modern architecture across East Asia. The dugong is a unique design only found in China. It is a system of brackets inserted between the top of a column and a crossbeam. It can be found in the ancient palace in the Forbidden City. Asian architecture also features a wonderful and elegant appearance. The unique outside has not only fit and satisfied the practical functional need of a building, but also exhibited its wonderful appearance. It is a good combination of practicality and beauty. The regular layout of most buildings strictly follow the axis-centered principle with symmetrical wings. Gorgeous ornaments can also be seen in many Asian architecture. Meticulous attention is given to ornaments either from a whole or specific part. Victorian architecture includes a variety of architectural styles that emerged during Queen Victoria's reign over the United Kingdom from 1837 to 1901. Victorian architecture rejected the subtle styles of the past in favor of a style that reflected the prosperity of certain social classes. And here are the characteristics and features of Victorian architecture. Victorian buildings were designed to be ornamental, with colorful exteriors, as well as complicated structures like bay windows, mansard roofs, and wrap-around porches. And now, let us move on to later times as we talk about modern and postmodern architecture. The modern movement in architecture in the United States flourished in the early 1930s and encompassed individual design movements that expressed modern ideals in different ways. Modern architecture is often characterized through clean lines, use of glass, flat roofs, open floor plans, and the use of modern materials. Postmodern architecture, also known as postmodernism or promo, is an architectural style that emerged in the late 1960s as a reaction against modernism. It was an intentional movement that focused on free-thinking design with conceptual consideration to the surrounding movement. Postmodernism is a bit unique, characterized by asymmetry, humor, fragmentation, and complexity. I hope you liked our little lecture about the different architectural designs throughout history. Thank you for listening and have a blessed day.